there was an island, far from cities, far from ships, far from everything. An island that had forgotten noise. An island that knew only the rhythm of the sea and the hush of the wind. It was small dash, just a slip of rock and earth, wrapped in green and grey. From above, it looked like a comma in the ocean, not the start of anything. Just a pause, a resting place. Waves circled it gently, soft as breath. They came and went like slow thoughts, touching the stone, kissing the shore, and leaving no trace. On this island stood a lighthouse, white, tall, worn smooth by time and salt. Its base was ringed with grey stones and moss. Seagulls sometimes perched on the railings, but they never stayed long. They preferred the wind. The tower leaned ever so slightly, like it was listening to the sea. And maybe it was. The light at its top turned slowly, even when the sky was clear. It didn't need to warn anyone tonight, but it turned all the same. Not out of duty, but rhythm. Like a heart that keeps beating, even when no one's listening. And inside this tower lived a man. He was not old, but he was quiet, and quiet makes a person seem older than they are. People once knew his name, but the island didn't care what it was. And after enough years, neither did he. He rose with the sun and slept with the stars. He spoke very little, mostly to the birds, and even then, softly. He had no clocks, no schedule, only the light to tend, and the island to walk. He lived in a small room built beside the base of the lighthouse. Stone walls, a wood stove, a kettle always hanging over the coals, and one chair, worn smooth by years of sitting, always angled toward the window. That window. It framed the sea like a painting, and every morning the man woke slowly, wrapped in thick wool blankets, with the scent of tide and old wood in the air. He would sit up, stretch quietly, and place bare feet on cool stone. Then he would listen, not for sounds, but for silence. And silence has many voices. There was the distant hush of waves, rubbing the rocks like fingers smoothing sand. There was the rustle of dry grass outside the door, dancing without music. There was the creak of the lighthouse as it settled in the morning air, like an old house waking slowly from a dream. These were the sounds he loved most, not because they were loud, but because they were enough. The man dressed slowly. Heavy trousers, a thick wool shirt, and a vest patched at the elbows. He took his time. Every motion deliberate, unhurried. He boiled water for tea, adding herbs he'd dried on hooks near the stove. Chamomile, lemon balm, a few leaves of mint. The kettle whispered before it sang. He poured it into a heavy ceramic mug, one that had been chipped long ago, but held the heat just right, and then he would walk. Out the wooden door, across the flagstones still damp with sea mist, and down the narrow path that wound around the base of the tower. The path was lined with small wildflowers, white, yellow and blue. tiny bursts of colour that didn't ask to be seen. They grew because they could. That was enough. He walked past them, boots brushing the soft edges of grass, moving with the slow confidence of someone who knows the ground beneath them. The sky was a soft, pale grey that morning. Clouds like long feathers drifted across it, and the sun, hidden behind the haze, still managed to make the sea sparkle like glass. The gulls wheeled in the air above. Their cries were faint, not sharp like they sometimes were, but long and distant, like the echo of a memory. The man stopped beside a rock outcrop, where tide pools formed in little hollows. He crouched down slowly, joints creaking like the lighthouse beams. He peered into the shallow water. Tiny shells, drifting seaweed, a single crab no larger than his thumb, picked its way along the bottom, unaware of being watched. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Instead, he stood again, hands in pockets, and turned his gaze out to the horizon. A long breath in, and a longer one out. The ocean was a blanket of calm. No boats, no sails. Just a smooth, blue stretch of forever. The man stood like that for a while. He could have stood for hours. And perhaps he did. Time was not something he measured anymore. Time moved like the tide, always returning, always leaving. Eventually, he turned back toward the tower. Its white stone caught the pale sun and glowed softly like a candle burning behind paper. The light at the top turned slow and steady and slow again. Inside, the spiral staircase waited. Worn wooden steps curved upward. A gentle climb into sky and silence. He ascended with no sound but the soft scrape of boot on step. Each footfall familiar. Each turn of the stair like a verse in a song he knew by heart. Halfway up, a small window looked out over the northern shore. He paused there. Always did. From that window, the world looked both wide and still. A single cormorant flew low over the water, wings brushing the sea with each beat. He watched it go until it vanished into mist. Then, on and upward. At the top, the lantern room greeted him, with the soft scent of oil and glass warmed by morning light. The lens, immense and perfect, turned with a grace that defied its weight. He checked the mechanism, listened to its soft whir and tick, everything in order. He placed his hand on the cool metal of the frame, not to fix anything, but as if saying good morning, and the lens turned. The man stood in the centre of the room. All around him, light moved slowly across the floor, across the walls, over his boots. He turned with it, not to follow, but to be part of its rhythm. And for a time, he stood there in silence, with the sea below, and the sky above, and the turning of the light. He did not need more than this. He had the day ahead of him, and no obligations but to witness it, to move through it with care, to tend the light, to sip the tea, to listen for nothing, to watch the clouds come and the sea breathe and the hours drift by like tide foam, because on this island the world did not hurry. and neither did he. Down the lighthouse stairs, step by step, the keeper descended in silence. His hand moved along the rail, not gripping it, just touching. Familiar wood worn smooth by years of quiet climbs. The air inside the tower was cool and clean. It smelled of stone, sea air, and faintly of oil, the kind that burns steady and soft. Outside, the gulls wheeled in slow circles, but even they had quieted. It was that hour, late morning, when everything feels suspended, not truly day, not yet afternoon, just still. He returned to the little house beside the tower. Its door creaked gently on its hinges, as if whispering hello. He stepped inside. The warmth welcomed him. The fire had not burned out. A few coals still glowed in the belly of the stove. He crouched beside it, added a log, one that had been drying beside the hearth since last week. He lit it with care. No hurry, no waste, just the sure hands of someone who had done this 1,000 times and never tired of it. The fire caught slowly. A flicker, a crackle, then warmth. He stood, rolled his shoulders. His joints whispered faintly. Not pain dash, just memory. And he poured himself another cup of tea. The kettle was still warm, steam curling in lazy spirals. He sat in his favourite chair by the window, not to look out, but to settle, to be. The cup was warm in his hands. He did not drink yet. He simply held it, let the heat seep into his fingers, and he listened to the soft shifting of wood as the fire moved, to the wind brushing against the glass, to the slow beat of his own heart, unhurried. Eventually he sipped. The herbs were delicate and grounding. He could taste the chamomile, the ghost of mint, a whisper of salt from the sea air that crept through the cracks. He smiled without moving, the kind of smile that lives in the eyes, the kind of smile that doesn't need to be seen. On a small shelf near the stove were the tools of his simple rituals. An old brass compass that no longer pointed anywhere useful. A leather notebook, its pages soft and browned with age. A pencil sharpened down to half its size. And a little tin of sand, collected from a beach long gone. He reached for the notebook, opened it slowly. The pages rustled like dry leaves, each one filled with careful, looping letters. He wrote. Not much, just a few lines. Light steady, sea flat, air cool, dreamed of pine trees. Heard a heron last night, no ships. He set the notebook down, satisfied, no audience needed. The writing was not for remembering, but for letting go. Outside, the light continued to turn. Inside, he cleaned the glass lanterns, polished them with a soft cloth, each one catching the firelight and holding it like a breath. He trimmed the wicks, checked the oil levels. None of them were needed during the day, but he kept them ready. Preparedness was not habit. It was kindness. The world, he believed, was always better lit gently. He moved on to the shelf near the back wall. Small wooden carvings stood there. Birds, mostly. Seals. A single whale, no longer than his thumb. He had carved them himself, whittled them slowly during long winters and fog-thick afternoons. He dusted them now, one by one, using an old feather. Each motion soft, each figure handled as if sacred. In the corner of the room, a simple broom leaned against the wall. He took it up, swept the floor slowly, deliberately. There was no dirt, not really, but the sweeping was a rhythm, a dance left to right, right to left. Tiny arcs, the hush of bristles on stone, a few specks of ash from the hearth, a single curled leaf that had blown in. He picked them up by hand, dropped them into the bin. He paused again by the stove. The fire was crackling now. Not loudly, but just enough to warm the bones of the house. The keeper placed a small pot of water on the stove, then a handful of dried lentils, some wild thyme, and a pinch of sea salt. No recipe, just memory. He stirred slowly with a long wooden spoon and opened the narrow window just a crack to let the steam drift upward into the waiting sky. Birdsong returned, a thrush this time, high and soft, hidden in the thicket near the path. He listened, noticing every note, every pause. Birds never rushed. They sang when the moment was right, and when it wasn't, they waited. The keeper admired that. He sat again as the soup simmered, this time at the little table beneath the oil lamp. The lamp was unlit for now, but he would light it soon. The clouds outside were beginning to thicken. The sun was somewhere behind them, a shy golden blur. The sea darkened slightly, not with storm, just with evening. He took a deep breath in, held it, let it out slowly. There was nothing urgent. There never was. He returned to the shelf and opened a small wooden box. Inside were letters, faded envelopes, some without stamps. He took one out, not to read, just to hold. Paper worn soft with time, ink smudged in places. He remembered who had written it, not the name, but the feeling. And sometimes that was enough. He put the letter back, closed the lid, ran a finger gently along the grain of the wood. Outside, the sea whispered again, calling him. He pulled on his coat, long, brown, lined with fleece, and stepped outside once more. The wind had picked up slightly, cool but not sharp. He walked the long path that wound around the island, past the mossy stones, past the tide pools, to the northern cliffs. There the world opened wide. Sky met water in a silent embrace. The wind hummed across the rocks, and the gulls, once noisy, now glided without sound. He stood at the edge, looking out. Below, the waves broke slowly on the stone, each one folding into the next, like breath on breath. He could see miles, and nothing at all. No ships, no sails, just the soft, endless blue. He sat on the smoothest rock, leaned back, and let the sea speak to him. It told him stories without words, of distant places, of deep currents, of whales passing in the night. The sea had seen everything and remembered nothing. That, he thought, was a gift. The keeper sat like that for a long time, breathing with the world. Eventually, he rose, brushed the moss from his coat, and walked slowly back to the tower. The sky had darkened a little more. The light above had begun its evening turn. A little brighter now. It swept across the sea, like a hand stroking a sleeping brow. Inside, the soup was ready. He ate it slowly, each spoonful warm. The thyme gentle, the lentils soft. No need for conversation. The fire cracked softly. The wind tapped at the window. The lighthouse turned on, and the keeper, in his quiet home, felt the evening fall, like a soft wool blanket across the shoulders of the world. Evening came gently to the island. It didn't arrive like a curtain falling. It came like fog, soft, slow and quiet, filling the spaces between light and dark. The keeper finished his supper, set the bowl aside, and stood by the window. He watched as the last traces of sun slid behind the clouds, leaving a faint gold smear across the sea. The lighthouse turned. Its beam, now bright, swept across the waves and touched the edge of the sky. Then circled back again, always turning, always patient. He did not speak. There was no one to hear, but also nothing that needed saying. In silence, he gathered his coat once more, and his lantern. A small brass thing, with a glass panel smudged by years of use. He lit it carefully, holding the match steady as the flame caught the wick. The soft glow bloomed inside the glass, a little golden sun, to carry with him into the dusk. Outside, the air had cooled. Not cold, just crisp enough to remind the skin. That night had come. He walked down the path again, past the wildflowers now folded in sleep, their tiny petals curled inwards, sheltering against the coming dark. The sea murmured gently, a deeper sound than before, not louder, just lower, like a voice softened by thought. He made his way to the eastern cliffs this time. There the rocks were smoother, and the land dipped closer to the waves. He sat again, the lantern placed beside him, its light throwing a soft circle on the stone. He looked out to sea. The horizon was no longer visible. Sky and ocean melted into each other. One dark body, endless still. Above, the first stars appeared. 1, then 2, then 5, then 1,000. Each one blinking patiently, unhurried. The keeper leaned back, hands resting on cool stone, and breathed deeply. The night air tasted of salt and something else. Something like time. Memories came like the tide, not rushing, just arriving. He thought of the first time he saw the island, so many years ago, when the tower was brighter and his hair darker. He had come on a boat that smelled of rope and fresh paint. There had been gulls then too, but louder. Or maybe he was just more easily startled then. The tower had seemed impossibly tall. A white needle pointing to the sky. He remembered climbing those stairs for the first time, each step echoing in the empty air. He had been younger, curious, a little afraid, but the island had welcomed him without words. It had spoken through silence, and he had learned to listen. He remembered storms and fog, and the first time he saw whales pass in the night. Huge shapes, barely visible, sliding through black water, their breath rising in soft plumes, like exhaled dreams. He remembered summer mornings, when the sun rose so fast it startled the sky, and winter nights, when snow fell so thick it muffled even his thoughts. He remembered laughter, not his own, but someone else's. Long ago, a visitor, a friend, or maybe a dream. He didn't chase the memory, let it drift. Memories, like seabirds, come and go. Trying to hold them only scares them off. The lantern flickered slightly as a breeze passed. He adjusted its shutter, protected the flame. He looked upward again. The stars were thicker now, a blanket of them, pale and steady, one shot across the sky. A thin line of light drawn by an invisible hand. He watched it fade, and he felt a peace that came not from answers but from questions that no longer needed asking. What time was it? It didn't matter. Night was here, and that was enough. He rose slowly, stretched, felt the night settle into his coat. He took the long way home, past the small grove of wind-stunted trees that leaned inland, always away from the sea. Their leaves barely rustled, but he could hear them, each sound like a breath. He paused by one tree, placed a hand on its bark. Rough, cool, alive. Even here, life held on. Back at the tower, he placed the lantern on its hook beside the door. It swayed gently, casting slow, moving shadows. He stepped inside, removed his coat, hung it neatly. The fire had dimmed, but the embers were warm. He added one small log, more for comfort than heat, and then he lit the oil lamp on the table. Its light was golden and soft, filling the room with a gentle hush. He poured a final cup of tea. This one, plain water, with just a few dried petals of lavender floating within. He sat in his chair again, the one by the window. Outside, the beam of the lighthouse turned, its light reaching across the night like a promise. He held the mug between his hands, sipped slowly. The tea was floral, delicate, sleepy, and he watched the world. The ocean was invisible now, but he could still hear it. Breathing in, breathing out, the kind of sound that never stops, even when you're not listening. He thought, perhaps that was what peace meant. Not silence, but knowing you don't need to speak. Not stillness, but knowing you don't need to move. He finished the tea, set the mug down, leaned back in his chair. His eyes grew heavy, but he didn't fight it. The light continued to turn. The stars continued to shine. The sea continued to breathe. And the keeper, wrapped in the hush of night, felt the edges of sleep begin to drift in. Inside the lighthouse, the air holds a soft, familiar warmth. The storm has passed, and the thick stone walls are once again wrapped in silence. Only the fire, crackling gently in its small hearth, speaks in murmurs. Its light flickers across shelves of sea-worn books, tools, and tiny wooden carvings left by keepers long gone. Shadows dance across the ceiling, long and slow. The keeper moves without hurry. He pours the last of his tea into a chipped porcelain cup, the same one he's used every evening for as long as he can remember. The cup fits perfectly in his hand now, shaped by years of use. The tea is still warm, steeped with herbs from the small garden behind the lighthouse, a little patch of green that survives the wind and salt. He takes a slow sip and lets the quiet settle over him, layer by layer. He stands stretching his arms overhead, bones creaking in a way he's come to appreciate. The aches of the body are just echoes of the day lived. He walks to the window and watches the beam of the lighthouse rotate, bright and unblinking as it sweeps across the sea, casting a line of light over endless black water. It feels like a breath the island takes on his behalf. Steady, deep, measured. There's nothing out there tonight, no ships that he can see, just stars, thousands of them, nestled in a velvet sky. The clouds from the storm have drifted off, leaving a sky so clear it feels as though he could step outside and fall upward into it. He watches Orion rise slowly over the horizon and finds the North Star with ease, as he's done every night since boyhood. He takes a moment longer at the window, not because he needs to, but because he wants to. Because standing there, looking out over the stillness, he feels the vastness of the world and the rightness of his small place in it. He doesn't need to speak for it to matter. He doesn't need to move for time to pass. He only needs to be here. Turning from the window, he returns to the fire and adds one last piece of driftwood. It catches quickly, sending up a few glowing sparks that swirl upward in the chimney's throat. The fire responds with a low sigh, its warmth stretching just a little farther into the room. The keeper lowers himself into his chair, an old thing, worn smooth at the arms and seat, moulded to his shape like the shoreline to the tide. A heavy wool blanket lies folded over the back. He drapes it over his knees, settles in, and lets out a long breath. Not a tired sigh, not a frustrated exhale, just a breath, simple and whole. From a small side table, he picks up a weathered journal. The leather is cracked at the edges and smells faintly of salt and pine. He opens it to a blank page and writes tonight's date, in slow, neat letters. Then, as he has every evening, he writes a few thoughts. Nothing grand, just notes about the wind, the birds, a reflection that came to him while fixing the hinge on the east door. He writes about how the gulls seemed quieter today, about the way the storm arrived all at once, as if summoned, then vanished without a trace. He pauses, pen held lightly between fingers, and stares into the flames. The fire does not ask questions. It only listens. Eventually, he closes the journal, placing it gently on the table beside a small brass key and a smooth, round stone. Two things that have no use, but mean something anyway. He sits back. The fire pops softly. Outside, the beam turns. The keeper's eyes begin to close, not from exhaustion, but from contentment. His day has been enough. There is nothing left undone. Nothing urgent remains. Just the rhythm of the waves brushing against the rocks below and the hum of wind curling around the tower. He thinks, briefly, of the days when the lighthouse was busier, when supplies came more frequently, when voices echoed up the stairwell, when someone else might have been stoking the fire with him. He does not miss the noise, but he remembers it kindly. He carries those days with him, in the same way he carries his memories of the sea, always present, but never in the way. The room begins to fade around him. He feels his body soften into the chair, the blanket heavy and warm over his legs. The last of the tea cools in the cup by his side, forgotten, but not wasted. His thoughts drift now, slowly and without direction, images and sounds rising and falling like the tide. He thinks of the heron that visited last spring, of his mother's bread, of a book he once read but never finished, of waves taller than the tower, and mornings so still that even the birds held their breath. His breath becomes slower. His chest rises and falls in perfect time with the turning of the beam. Light. Pause. Light. Pause. Like the rhythm of a lullaby sung by the sea itself. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounds, a low, deep note that settles into the night like a lull. It's a sound he's known since childhood, one that always seemed to promise safety, even when the sea was cruel. As he drifts further into sleep, the line between dream and memory blurs. He is a boy again, chasing the wind across the cliff path. Then a young man, painting the lighthouse railing. Then older, sitting beside his father as he showed him how to tend the flame. Time folds around him, soft and kind. The fire dims, now glowing more than burning. Its warmth lingers like a gentle hand on the shoulder. Outside, the sea breathes. The island too rests. The birds sleep in crevices. The grass leans with the breeze. The stars shift quietly overhead, keeping their endless watch. And the lighthouse beam, unwavering, continues its slow, deliberate arc. One rotation, then another. A signal in the darkness. A promise. The keeper does not stir. His breathing is deep, even, and the lighthouse watches over him. The sea breathes, the light turns, and the island sleeps with him.